Go. So for the folks who are here, thank you very much. Hopefully we'll get a few more come in as time moves on. But I'd like to answer a question. I think that was Najala about the November 29th. Is that going to be a regular class? Thanksgiving season, yes, I know, but it will be a regular class day.
Okay.
So we're still going to be meeting at 9 o'clock in the morning. I understand some people will be away. If you have access to internet and can manage to secure yourself away so that you don't pester other people, please do come because your attendance in class when we're talking about what we are talking about, Carol was talking about, well, you know, it was kind of tricky in the front, but, you know, it starts turning into kind of like this developing story. You know, lecture is going to help get that clarification, and we're going to talk about some clarification pretty soon. So yes, November 29th, regular meeting time. So that being said, I'll continue to go through the schedule to make sure that if there's any clarification we need, I'll make sure I have that for you. This is also the first semester I have given my cell phone number to students. The phone number that is on that syllabus is my cell phone number. If you have a question, if you have a concern, or you need clarification on something, you may text message me. That's right, I text message. I know how to use them buttons. So send me a message. I will respond. If you send me a text message at 9 to 10 o'clock at night, I'm not going to respond until the next day, but I will respond. Yes, Valeria?
No, nothing, Professor.
No? Okay. The other thing is, please, in each message you send me, introduce yourself. Hello, this is Cynthia. Hello, this is Alina or Canel. Make sure that you have that introduction, because when your message is done and I've answered it, I'm going to erase it. Otherwise, all I'm going to have is like a million different phone numbers in my text message, and that's it. You know what I mean? So I'm going to wind up deleting those messages once that's answered, but I will respond. And I want to make sure that what I've said is correct. I believe I had put that in there. Hang on one second. Yep, there. Yep, my contact number is there. Oh, here comes Susan. All right, we're getting more. I'm excited now.
Good morning, Professor.
Good morning, Susan.
I had a little problem getting into your link.
Well, yes. That's one of the things I went over a little bit earlier. In terms of the YouTube, I have made those public. So when you go into the YouTube channel that I have established for Turo, you will now just be able to click on the videos and they'll come right up.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Yes.
So that, and we are currently going to have lectures recorded. It will usually take about a day to get them up because the lectures have to convert and all this stuff before they can be posted.
Okay.
I'm glad you're here though, because the next bit that I want to talk about, and just for your case, Susan, if you need to contact me for clarification on anything, you can send me a text message.
Yes.
And I will respond.
Yes.
The phone number on the syllabus is my cell phone number.
Okay, yes, Professor.
If you send around 9 or 10 o'clock, I won't respond until the next day.
I know it's after hours.
Good. Has anyone thought about their topics for their paper? Canel's like, no, man, not me. Okay, so let's talk about labor for a moment. Kara, you've done a little reading. You want to express to them what you saw in the text about labor?
I'm reading too.
Tell them what you told me.
Oh, okay. That, trying to think, I'm just trying to remember what I told you. Was it about the technology thing, about like people that have technology now can't work?
Well, it's changing, right?
Oh, yeah.
Labor now is changing because if you don't have technology, you're going to limit yourself on what occupations or labor jobs that are going to be available to you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, here I am. If I didn't have a computer or technology, I would not be able to teach right now because they've closed campuses. Boom. That's just the way it is. Labor changes over time. And this is part of what we talked about briefly in the very first class. And labor really, and history is a story. It is always a story. And you can make that story as exciting and riveting or as boring as you want. But really, the content is up to you to interpret. And I talk to people about, oh, I'm teaching labor history in the US, and they're like, oh God, that sounds horrible. And I'm like, no, it's pretty awesome. And they look at me like I got 3 heads.
When you do the videos, it's awesome. When you're reading the book, not so much.
Well, you know. Let me tell you what, this book is actually very enjoyable to read compared to some of the Oxford histories I've read. Oxford Histories, 8-point font. You want to talk about dry, Sahara Desert got nothing. You just take knitting needles and go, I'm done, call me Oedipus. It was bad, but I survived. It's really the information. And when you're reading that history book, you're reading that history book not like a novel. You can think of it like a novel, and it's more enjoyable that way. But you're really trying to get that information out. Make yourself a movie in your mind while you're doing it. And what I want to do, first we're going to give a few definitions. And then we're going to talk about some paper possibilities. Because what was expressed to me earlier is that the true definitions or the differences between indentured servitude, slave, labor, and master, employer, and capital. These things change, and each one has its own different meaning, and they change as a result of differing needs in early America. And that is really how the story of labor is going to wind up taking place, is how these things change. To begin with, a master. When you're talking about early America, a master is a tradesman who has a shop. And it's not like a shop that we think of today. He might be the only particular tradesman in that trade in his community, whether it's a shoemaker, a cooper who makes barrels, a blacksmith, a leather worker, and he has to provide for the entire community. The people that he takes into his shop to teach this trade are called apprentices, right? And these apprentices wind up being given clothing, food, board. Sometimes they're given a small stipend so that they can spend on something for themselves. But they have a contract, a very strong and binding contract that they cannot leave. And it is, sometimes this leads to some very unpleasant circumstances in terms of the indentured servant. And it can be extraordinarily oppressive, and they will run away. And we'll talk about that in just a few moments. So that's a master, right? They're the master of the trade, and they're teaching the apprentice, who will then wind up leaving at some point to go somewhere else to practice the trade, and that makes them what's called a journeyman. Have you ever heard these terms? Apprentice, journeyman, master, in terms of trades? This is where they stem from. The next level in terms of the business owner is the employer. The employer takes a person in hires them at a wage that they wind up paying for that person to do an agreed amount of work, and they work for a period of time and then they go home. Now that sounds nice and easy, doesn't it? It's what we do today, right? Well, in early America, when you go from the trade to an employer, the master to the employer, your hours of work were 14 to 16 hours a day. You worked from sun up to sundown, and then you went home. That's just the way it was. And this is where we start to wind up getting some of the irritation in labor about not having enough to meet the needs. We need shorter days, and we'll get into that in a few
Is this when a union was?
We'll get to that. We're getting there.
Okay.
Don't worry. Right now, we're just dealing with the definitions.
Oh, okay.
Capital. Capital. When you're talking about capital, you have now transitioned from just an employer into a large-scale industry owner. All right, you're talking about the industrialists. And capital really isn't going to come around until, I'd say, the mid-19th century. Remember, the United States does not have an industrial revolution in this country until after the American Civil War. When people think about the Industrial Revolution in the United States, what do we generally think of? What's the image in your head? The Industrial Revolution. What's the picture in your head?
Factories.
Factories, right? Steam, big steel wheels turning, right? None of that happens in the United States until after the Civil War. The American Civil War leads to that particular type of explosion of industry. So those are the three different types of employers. And I want to make this very clear about that very first one, the master. When you're talking about master and apprentice, the two of them worked together. Both of them were in production. Both of them were doing work in the shop room. Different skill levels, absolutely, but both of them were working together. So as you go to the employer is now going into an office, right?
Mm-hmm.
And doing the paperwork and the drudgery of a business, keeping things moving, keeping the orders going, contacting customers and other things, right? Writing the letters, coming out onto the floor, making sure things are flowing, but they're generally no longer a part of the production process. And then when you wind up getting to capital, do you ever see the owner? Once in a great while, maybe, if you're lucky, but you don't see the employer because the employer is someone else. He's got a manager running the factory for him or her to wind up producing the product, right? And we're going to talk about what that means. What do you think it would mean to take the owner of the business away from production?
So like only the apprentices will be like the ones to approve what's going on. He's not really overseeing it if he's not present.
Well, he's not overseeing it. That's one good call.
Mm-hmm.
Colette, what do you think?
Sorry. I don't think it would be good for the business.
Well, it would definitely change the matters, wouldn't it? Susan,
Yes.
You looked like you had a...
If there is a positive and a negative, he wouldn't be there to kind of stress out the employees by complaining and dictating too much of stuff. You need a manager for that. And then on the same hand, if you don't have somebody on the top to send to the lower one how to operate the system, it can go bad too. So it's either way.
Canel, what do you think?
You mean Janelli?
Ramirez?
Canel Nelson?
Oh, no.
That's okay. We'll get you.
What was the question again?
What do you think would the effect be of the master not being with the apprentice in production? We're talking about early America, and right now in early America, you have the master and the apprentice working together in the shop. But as you transition from master apprentice into employer, that connection is no longer there. What's the effect of that?
You will have less production?
Less production? Well, it's possible. Cynthia?
let's see. So if you said if the master wasn't there with the apprentice,
Right.
well, you're only considering the apprenticeship situation right now.
Mm-hmm.
So the apprentice could mess up or make errors.
You've got a few folks who have watched Fantasia, I think. Has anyone seen Fantasia?
Yeah.
Sorcerer's Apprentice? Oh, man. Well, yes, the apprentice could mess things up. I suppose I should say that I am looking a little bit deeper here. Cynthia, I see you made it in. Thank you. I'm going to get you squared away here.
Also, Professor, maybe the apprentice will start to think that they don't need any masters, that they can handle things themselves.
That's some good insight. Yeah, absolutely. If you wind up getting good at what you do, that's when you're starting to get into your journeyman aspect, right?
Yeah.
You know, I want to spread my wings a little. Jane Lee, how about you?
Would the apprentice want a wage, like a higher wage?
Oh, I want to get a little bit more goodies. I want a nicer, I would like a nicer waistcoat, or maybe I could get a chain for my watch. Yeah. I like that.
Doing all the work.
They are doing all the work. And now you're starting to get somewhere. The apprentices are doing all the work. Valeria, how about you?
The same thing, like if he'll not be there, then I think so maybe the business will go down.
Okay.
Because sometimes they are support with the money, because manager is supervisor, but all the thing is coming from them.
I got you. Ariana?
I'm gonna have to agree with what Valeria and Janelli said. Yeah, it just depends on their supervision, I guess, and the level of control that they have.
Okay. And Cheryl, I saw you made it in. How about you? What do you think of what would happen when we were talking about the differences between the master and apprentice, employer and employee, and then capital and labor? So you might want to listen in. We are recording so that you can come back and catch up with this discussion a little later. Kara, how about you?
I think that they're going to be forced to hire more employees because the apprentice is doing all the work.
Well, here's the thing with early America. When you're talking about master and apprentice, the two generally worked in the shop together. Socially speaking, within the community, they had a status that was important, right? Their status in the community was considered needed because they produced needed goods. And so both the master and the apprentice was someone that was appreciated within the community. As you transition from master and apprentice to employer and employee, and eventually capital and labor, that status diminishes for the laborer. Do you understand what I'm saying here? As the owner takes himself out of production, the less hand the owner has in production, the lower status labor finds itself in within its community. When you think about early America in a master and apprentice relationship, it's almost a relationship of equals with the exception of the skill level, right? Exactly. When you wind up thinking of the second industrial revolution, where you have Andrew Carnegie and his steel company, and then the laborer pouring the molten steel into their molds, are they on the same social status outside of business?
No.
Not just no. Oh, hell's no. It's hell's no. Those two don't mix.
But that's happening today too.
Exactly. And that's part of why you're taking this class. So we're going to talk about how this happens and why labor unites and the different ways in which they can unite, and why it's important for you to understand what's involved with that, okay? Then there are a couple other things to understand about labor in early America. And this has to do with going from the indentured servant and bringing slaves, okay? And this is going to be something that will be regional. When you talk about how labor develops in this country, it develops differently based on the region in which you live. And it will be very different if you are in New England, if you happen to be in Pennsylvania, if you happen to be in Maryland, if you happen to be in the upper South, or eventually the lower South, which is where it's going to probably be the most aggressive in terms of its slavery conditions. So how labor develops depends on where you are in the country. When you're talking about New England, you're talking about manufacturing, shipbuilding, right? You're talking about the development of small industry, button manufacturing. I know that sounds funny, but yes, button manufacturing. You're talking about, in the South, agrarian societies that develop. And in very early settlement America, they are growing food crops for society, right? If you don't have food, what happens?
Don't eat.
You don't eat, you don't eat, you die. And it's not a fun way to go.
No.
So people produce food for subsistence, but something happens after 1610, and about 10 years later, there's going to be a new need. In 1610, they find this stuff called tobacco. You know, how many people have smoked? It's okay, you can be honest. I tried a pack, it didn't go for me. I don't smoke personally.
I tried one, it didn't go for me.
I know, they taste like crap, don't they? Blech.
They stink.
They do. My mom was a continuous smoker most of her life, and I'm like, Mom, that stuff stinks.
Yeah.
She finally quit, and I was like, man, this stuff's awful. However, it is ridiculously addictive.
Very.
You know, it is worse than heroin when you are talking about a chemical addiction, nicotine itself. But they discover this stuff on Bermuda. They bring it over to the mainland in the colonies, and boom, the stuff takes off like a weed, and it sells like crazy because people get hooked on this stuff. And they're like, okay, yeah, they go from food crops, subsistence, and they go into cash crops, where they're going to wind up growing a surplus and selling it at a profit so that they can buy what they need, right? This is a change. And prior to this change, indentured servants, okay, we can use them so far. They don't quite work the way we want them to. They don't quite do, they have some problems in terms of disease immunities, but you know, they're doing all right for right now. Tobacco hits, combine that with sugar, indentured servants are not enough. I want to pull something up here that I had put together prior to class, and I am going to post it on Canvas for you so that you have a copy of this to review when you need. This is just a visual that I think might help a little bit, which I'm going to start sharing this screen so that you can see it. This is a graphic of advertisements for indentured servitude and for slaves. And so what is the difference between the two? For a little while, there's not much of one. And here's what I mean. This is a very early, this is 1832. This is an indentured servitude for Betsy Cudney. Ran away from the subscriber, an indentured servant girl of about 12 or 13 years old. All persons hereby forbid harboring, trusting, or employing under the full penalties of the law. She's 12. Whoever will return said runaway will receive an above reward, but no charges paid. This is South Salem, which would be Massachusetts, 1832.
Oh, 1 cent reward.
Well, understand that 1 cent back then
yeah,
was a little different.
Mm-hmm.
It really was. That could wind up getting you groceries for a week.
Wow.
Just arrived at Leedstown, the Justitia, with about 100 healthy servants. This is an advertisement going out to people that need servants. Mm-hmm. Men, women, and boys, among which are many tradesmen, blacksmiths, shoemakers, tailors, house carpenters and joiners, cooper, bricklayer, plasterer, painter, watchmaker, glaze, and watchmaker, right? Really skilled. The sale will commence on Thursday, the 2nd of April at Leedstown on the Rappahannock, which would be Virginia. Reasonable credit will be allowed, giving bond with approved security to Thomas Hodge. I have assorted cargo of goods from London. And so, yeah, they're selling servants off the ship. A servant girl, her time to be disposed of, having about 2 years and 4 months to serve. This is an indentured servitude. They have a time that they must serve before they can be released from their bond. And very fit for coarse work, spins exceedingly well, and would do for country business. For terms apply to James Plunkett at Sign of Aesop in the Shades in Walnut Street, Philadelphia. To be sold, a Scotch servant girl who has almost 4 years to serve. She's had the smallpox. Now, you're going to see this in quite a few advertisements. They've had the smallpox. This is important because if you've had the smallpox, you've already gained immunity. Smallpox was an absolute killer at this time. So if you survived it, you were pretty much rest assured you were going to not have an issue with it going forward. And if you had just purchased a servant, you didn't want to have to deal with downtime because that's poor investment, isn't it? So they go on to say she's remarkably strong and healthy, fit for town and country benefits. Inquire at the printing office, Philadelphia. And then here we have a very interesting advertisement. This is from a Philadelphia newspaper as well. A likely servant man's time for 4 years, well qualified for clerk, teach school, reads, writes, understands arithmetic, and then lately imported from Antigua to be sold by Edward Jones, parcel of likely Negro women and girls from 13 to 1 and 20, all had the smallpox. To be sold to very likely Negro boys, quantity of good lime juice to be sold cheap. And these are all out of Philadelphia. And these sound very, very much like a slavery advertisement, doesn't it? So here we're going to come down to, this is straight up a slavery advertisement. This is actually a pretty famous advertisement. If you've had a history class, you've probably seen it. To be sold on board the ship Tuesday the 6th, about 250 fine, healthy Negroes. 250! Have you ever seen the size of some of these ships?
Very small.
Yes.
They have them like head to foot laid out.
It is not a
comfortable
enjoyable cruise. No. The utmost care has already been taken and shall be continued to keep them free from the least danger of being infected with smallpox. No boat having been on board. This is Charlestown down in Virginia. And then here we have a runaway for a slave, Negro man in 1774. $10 reward. Now you're going to see a big difference here. Remember Betsy?
Mm-hmm.
Child, 1 cent reward. They're given $10. This is 1774. This is 1832. Now, what we've looked at here is, and I'm going to stop sharing. What we've looked at here is actually, there's one difference between an indentured servant and a slave. Who wants to tell me what that difference is?
They're paying for the slave.
Jane Lee?
They're paying for the slave.
Well, they're paying for the indentured servant too.
Oh, they are.
Yeah, they are these advertisements up here to be sold. To be sold. Those are all for indentured servants.
Okay, because I know the indentured servants they pay off their debt by working.
They pay off their debt by working. Now we're getting somewhere. Who else wants to chime in? That difference.
Indentured servants wasn't slaves, pretty much. That makes sense.
During their time of indenture, they're pretty damn close. There's one difference between an indentured servant and a slave.
Where the indentured servants, basically, they enter these contracts free will, whereas
right.
What your definition of free will is, in Europe.
In that sense, back then it wasn't as free, but they entered it. What we look at now, it doesn't seem good as far as being free will, but the slaves, they didn't have a choice.
Well, they certainly didn't have a choice. That is absolutely true. I will put it this, I think maybe, Jane Lee, you touched on it, but maybe I didn't quite grasp what you were trying to say in the way you worded it. An indentured servant's time does end.
Yeah.
A slave's time
never
ends.
Wow.
And this is the difference. By definition, a slave is somebody who owns the physical being of another individual and all the production thereof. This definition is how slavery becomes matrilineal. You combine that with the fact that indentured servants don't happen to have the immunities that the regions need, and they don't happen to have you call it work ethic is the best way I can put it. They don't work as hard as they need them to with the new cash crop system.
They don't have the strength.
They don't have the strength. Yeah, exactly. You're talking about Europeans that are going to go out and put into the fields where they got to clear forests. They got to wind up cutting down sugar cane. They got to wind up harvesting the tobacco. And you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of acres. There's just not the numbers available. So therein comes your difference. But I'll tell you, indentured servitude had all of the horrors that we understand of slavery inclined with it. There are plenty of accounts where servants in the home were beaten, were abused, were worked to death. In fact, when you're talking about indentured servitude in the time of Oliver Cromwell in England, you've heard his name, right? Oliver Cromwell? Yeah, he was basically the only one to successfully, outside of William the Conqueror, the only one to successfully conquer England. And he was an Englishman.
Wow.
Oliver Cromwell would gather up children that were running around the streets, put them on ships, and send them over to Jamaica and work them to death.
Yeah, I read that.
This is where the term kidnapping comes from.
Wow.
And they were called indentured servants. Indentured servants would also have been convicts, someone convicted of a crime. Hey, you got a choice. You can go to the goal, or you can wind up going over to the New World. In England, if you go to prison, They don't feed you. You got to have somebody on the outside that brings you food. Yeah, prison in England was not anywhere you wanted to be. So you would say, yeah, put me on a ship. And this would wind up being abused horribly. The Virginia Company was a joint stock company that establishes Jamestown in Virginia. And they wind up making great use of this indentured servitude, basic kidnapping and transportation for labor. And it's done for decades until they finally decide that this is not something that's needed. So when you're talking about early labor, oftentimes it is still a forced labor. It is not a choice. And when you're talking about, now when you're talking about redemptioners, you may have seen that term in your text. Remember the term redemptioners? Does anyone remember what a redemptioner is? Because this will be something I'll put on a test.
Okay, you're right to know.
She's like, I'm getting my pen. A redemptioner, commonly they come from Germany. There is a broker who will go over for the shipping companies to places to bring needed labor to the New World. And it's a need that the New World has. They talked about Cotton Mather giving devotions to God to bring a good and worthy servant into his household. So there's a need for labor. Well, these brokers go overseas and they tell people about the jobs that are available in the land of milk and honey and all this wonderful things. And, you know, you want to come over here and you don't have to deal. And in Germany, this is really better than where they are, because in Germany, there's a state of constant warfare taking place at the time. And if you think about warfare, we are so wonderfully blessed by our geography, because all you have to do is turn on the news, take a look at the Middle East, take a look at East Europe, take a look at wherever there's a conflict, and you will see the devastation that warfare winds up delivering. In Germany, they've had constant warfare between the Germanic states going on all this time. And so these people want to leave. And so the people who sign up to come over to the New World from Germany and other places and use their indenture to pay for the passage over are called redemptioners.
So they gain passage by bringing these people to the...
This is a willing indentured servant.
Oh.
Kind of. Sometimes they've been tricked by giving them a pretty picture, but for the most part, they have a better opportunity somewhere else. And so they're willing to work 7 years to pay for that passage.
Wow.
So that's what a redemptioner is.
I feel like we still have that in a way. Like, if you want to talk about citizenship.
Yes.
I feel like people, unfortunately, people that don't have a citizenship and trying to come to America for an opportunity have it really hard. They have to work. Sometimes they have to sneak their way through. Sometimes they work for somebody's house just so they can get, I don't know, like there's a lot of things that I feel like still happen today.
And what you're talking about there is definitely what we would call, in a simplified form, have and have-nots. You're talking about a bit of a class struggle there. And that's going to play a large part in labor history, class struggle, right? What does labor do? Canel, if you were to say what labor does, what does labor do?
End up working for
We
somebody.
work, right?
Yeah.
Get our hands dirty. Mechanics of the world. The farmer, right? The construction worker. We get our hands dirty. Are they the kinds of guys that you think of at the country club?
No.
Oh.
No. Already, we're starting to talk about class differences. And yes, Kara, that is absolutely true. You will see huge difference in how people work and how they have to fight their way up, especially when you're talking about immigration. That is a long story that has a large part to play within the labor history of this country. If you want something that's actually on the very tip of the news today in terms of that story, take a look at Eddie Van Halen. I know you're like, what? Eddie Van Halen? Why the hell are you talking about him? Eddie Van Halen was Dutch. Now, not only was he Dutch, his father was a Dutch musician with basically no money coming to this country, who was married to an Indonesian woman in 1955. That is, you want to talk, that they had to deal with some huge hurdles. They didn't speak the language, and they had to fight and scrap for everything that they had. And this kid basically built his own guitar from pieces and taught himself how to play. Now, we say Eddie Van Halen, and immediately we think of this rock star that just has gobs of money. And why are we talking about this as a struggle? Because in his youth, it really, really, really was. He had to learn English. He had to deal with a society that saw his parents as being something that you just didn't do. I know. That story is still told today, isn't it?
I've never heard it until you just mentioned it. I got to do some research now.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I didn't realize it myself. And I'm a huge, I grew up in that time frame. I was a Van Halen fan, right? I'd be out there, I want to be Eddie! But yeah, his backstory has some pretty deep roots to it, and it's worth taking a look at. And I've actually seen a lot of immigrants and their children really work ridiculously hard, but when they succeed on a ridiculous scale because they know what they have to do in order to do it. And that's one of the success stories, but it has some pretty deep roots there. So we understand how that begins to change, right? That relationship. Does that define those pretty clear? Kara, you mentioned you had some questions in those.
Yeah, no, it's more clear now.
Okay. Because that's really how things are going to change. They're going to change based on the needs in the community. And just because you don't have cash crops in the North doesn't mean that indentured servitude and slavery does not exist. It does. So that will continue, and that's not actually going to be solved until 1865, when we wind up getting our 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments passed after the American Civil War, right? And these are important amendments. Anyone want to tell me what they think they are? Well, I'll chime in for you. All of them are massively important, but the 13th Amendment outlaws slavery in the United States.
You said the 13th?
13th.
You said abolishes it, or?
Abolishes slavery.
I can't remember what the 15th Amendment was, but you have mentioned the 15th Amendment was voting for Black men only.
That's correct. Voting rights for Black men were given by the 15th Amendment.
Or the 15th?
15th, 1-5.
The 14th Amendment was the one that gave citizenship?
The 14th Amendment, you're close. The 14th Amendment actually, the 13th Amendment basically gives citizenship, no slaves, you're a citizen. The 14th Amendment gives due process. This means that you have to have due process and persecution of the law. And that goes for everybody. All these amendments go for everybody. But even more importantly to others are that 13th and 14th Amendment. And ladies, I'm very sorry, voting rights don't show up to you until 1920. But that's another discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So the economy, as the economy unfolds in this fledgling United States, the labor needs will change in this country as well. We're going to go from just apprentices and indenture, and we're going to go into employees as that economy begins to change, and production also is going to begin to change. In terms of life in this time frame, when you're talking about the 18th century, you're starting to see also an increase in populations. Understand that the life expectancy in the United States or early colonial America is going to be greater than if you lived in Europe, in the home country. Childbirth, women, your likelihood of surviving childbirth is greater here in the colonies, in the New World, than in Europe. You actually have a much greater likelihood of living longer here in the colonies than in Europe. And so these are reasons why people are coming over and why the populations are growing. And while the populations are growing, by this time, so is the slave population. And so what you have now is you have a concern. And this concern is highlighted beginning in 1676. 1676, not seven.
Sorry to interrupt, but when did you say that the population started to grow?
You're going to see that population growing beginning in the 18th century,
in the
1700s.
Okay.
1700s, that population is expanding, not just through immigration, although that's taking place, but also from people who live here, natural increase. And you're going to start to see that population rise, leading to changes in how that economy is going to run. And what's highlighted in your textbook in the first chapter is actually a New York City, what they consider to be a slave uprising that takes place in New York City. There's actually a fabulous history book written about it called New York Burning. And this is going to talk about the tensions that are going to begin to occur between slaves and free, white and black. And here's what, and poor and wealthy. And this is a means by which they use to try to keep them separate. In 1676, and that is the right date, 1676, there was a rebellion in Virginia. It's called Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon was a lesser noble that came over, and he was always looking to improve his station. And it turns out that there was an Indian incursion, and he wanted vengeance, and the governor said no. So what he did was he took the poor whites and he took the blacks and the slaves and said, I'll give you freedom if you fight with me. And he tried to create an insurrection that would set up his own little fiefdom out in the hinterlands. This rebellion was crushed rather brutally by the governor and the militia. And from that point onward, the black codes that wound up beginning to be put in place more and more regularly were designed to keep the poor whites and the slaves from being a threat. Because when you take those two classes together as a whole, they are a threat. And that's what starts that differentiation. And and during that time frame, you had African American slave owners. That was part of the society of the period. It's not right? In our world, that's not what you do. but that was part of that world. After 1676, that disappears. And those codes become more stringent, and it keeps the societies apart. In terms of New York, what you wound up seeing, most homes at this time frame are built out of wood. You don't have a whole lot of brick. You don't have a whole lot of stone. And so when you have this New York City, all homes are being lit by candlelight, oil lamps. You're cooking on an open fire. You've got sparks and cinders. You've got wood staves for shingles. Fires are common. What they started to see was a group of fires at important locations, and they say it must be an insurrection. Take a look at the book New York Burning. Basically, the author comes up with the opinion that more than likely it's what turns into a witch hunt. And as a result, a large number of slaves and poor whites and poor blacks are arrested, charged, convicted, and hung. And again, this is being used as a means to separate those classes to prevent them from gaining authority or power. Understand that indentured servants are absolutely vital to the economy of this period, right? You can't have this economy grow without them. You cannot have the economy of this period without slavery. You can't. You cannot make a plantation successful or profitable without slaves. It's not possible. You've got to have cheap labor. And in terms of slavery,
That was true, but...
yeah. And so this is just the way it was. It's not pretty, it's not nice, but that's part of our history. And when you hear something in history that you don't like, I like to tell folks, well, good. If you don't like it, maybe you'll remember it so we don't do this again. Because if it happens again, it's going to be bad, really bad. So I've had people come to me and talk to me about, oh, what do you think if we have another civil war? I'm like, I freak out. You don't want that. So anyway, back onto this. You are going to begin to see a gap occur in terms of who has wealth and who does not. The more wealth you have, the less contact you're going to have with the labor in terms of production. And it starts in the seaport cities. New York, Boston, Charleston, Atlanta. All of these locations are going to be where the wealth is initially going to be generated and coming in. And that's where you're going to get the gap. In New England, it's going to be in the manufacturing. In the South, it's going to be in agriculture. And where you are is going to wind up dictate how those things change. So you want to also think about the hours of the day and how long a person works, right? I talked briefly about you work from sunup to sundown. So as things are changing and the owners are no longer in production with their worker and they see themselves, the workers see them sitting down, maybe not even in the shop anymore. This is going, and they're working sun up to sundown, where the owners of the shop are no longer even being seen. This is going to begin to cause problems. As this separation intensifies and grows, they start to see their status in society dropping even further. So you want to take a look at how this develops over time. This is where workers are going to begin to come in. Now, where do unions begin? They begin from the trade guilds that these various different shops had. like the advertisements that we saw, the blacksmiths, the coopers, the shoemakers, the watchmakers. Each of them had a guild in order to protect wages and prices. And if someone came from outside of the community into the location where this shop was, they had to approach the guild or they wouldn't get work. Right? If you come into a town and undercut the person across the street from you, you're going to piss off a lot of people who are members of this community. And that's where those guilds come into play. And this is going to eventually turn into some of the workers' associations that we call unions early on. And this is going to be called, by some, a revolution of the working class. Because remember, we will have had recently a revolution with the mother country, England, right? We fought actually quite an extended conflict from 1775, 1775. That was when Lexington and Concord took place, through to 1786. So 11 years. Wow. Yeah, I know. We don't even, oh, the American Revolution, it took place and then it was over and we kept on. No, it was a long fight.
Very.
And I consider the American Revolution not just a revolution, but it was really a civil war. Because prior to that, we were Englishmen. And we had to find a way of not being that. So we had just recently fought a revolution, and so we're starting to use this particular language in terms of how others are rising up against the system. And they're beginning to rise up against the system because of the hours that they're working. We're talking, the rhetoric of rights, of property, of individual freedoms, all of this goes into the American Revolution, and that also winds up going into the labor movement itself, right? And so labor sees, hey, how am I any less of an individual? We just fought a revolution over this sort of stuff. And as they begin to unite, the owners of the factories and the production begin to go, wait a minute, this is my private property. I started this production. You have every right not to work for me if you don't want to. This is where that argument begins to take place. Someone needs to make a wage to keep the family supported, right? Some folks call it the family wage, some call it a living wage, but you need to support your family. Do women generally work outside of the home?
Not in those times.
Nope. No, not in those. Today, everybody works. It's what you do. But back then, generally not. Opportunities were extraordinarily limited. And so workers were looking for a wage that would support the whole family. Employers were looking for ways to maximize production at the lowest cost. And because of the separation of the two, they began to see labor as a commodity. Not as much at this point, but when we get into the second industrial revolution, that is absolutely going to be the case. You are going to see a commodity of labor to be used as much as possible with the least amount of expenditure. And that's just the way it was. So how does a worker resist when they don't have a lot of power or authority? Because let's face it, I basically watched Game of Thrones in its entirety for the first time over COVID. And I remember a scene. Did everybody pretty much see Game of Thrones by now? No? It was pretty intense. There's a character there named Cersei. And Cersei is having a discussion. Mark, you got it. Cersei and this other character named Littlefinger are having a discussion, and Littlefinger is saying, oh, you know, power is what you perceive. And Cersei, who is the queen, looks over and says to her guards and says, kill that man. They go to kill him, and she goes, oh, no, stop. I've changed my mind.
She was showing off her example of her power.
Exactly. And she looks at him and she says, that's power.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do those without power resist with any sort of real possibility? And this is what chapter 2 goes into. It's a new nation, it's a new economy, you've got new industries, and you've got new skilled workers coming into the lands. And so you've got Irish coming in. Oh my God, the Irish. You chuckle, but in reality, the Irish were greatly looked down upon. You want to talk about some pretty nasty discrimination. They didn't speak English. They generally spoke a language called Gaelic, which most people would hear and go,
what is that?
Yeah. And then they were Catholic. Oh, no. We can't have this. Religion plays a huge part in what happens in history.
Mm-hmm.
Whichever faith you would ascribe to, that's cool. That's awesome. When I'm talking about religion and faith, I'm just talking about it within a historical context. And so I want to first make that statement. Some people may not quite grasp what I'm trying to say. I want to make that very clear. When you're talking about Catholics coming into the country right after the American Revolution, you're talking about a foreign thing. You are talking about one of the things that the revolution was trying to contend with. Most of the people in this country at that point were what they would call Protestant. And Catholics, if you were a practicing Catholic at that time, you revered the Pope. Was the Pope an American?
Wasn't he English?
No.
Oh, no, he wasn't English. The Pope at that time was usually Italian.
Oh.
Yes. And so when people in this country saw Catholics, they saw someone who had an allegiance to somebody from a different nation. And so they treated them with a great deal of suspicion.
Oh.
And so when you're talking about immigration and labor and society and class in this country, it is far more complex than you can really begin to think about, where you think, oh, it's just the haves and the have-nots. On a simplistic level, I'd love to be able to say that and call it a day, but it's not that easy. And how people wind up getting themselves out of that discriminatory section, that's where all that story lies. Well, you've got Irish immigrants coming in. They're getting some of the lowest paying, nastiest, dirtiest jobs out there. You're going to get lower skilled workers coming into the country, whereas before you had high skilled workers coming into the country. And so you're going to get an influx of people that don't have that high skilled labor that managed to maintain somewhat of a parity prior to the revolution. Now you're seeing that parity change, right? The other thing that you have happen at the same time is something called the cotton gin. The cotton gin, prior to its production, slavery was beginning to wear off. It was dying away. With the cotton gin, it actually revived slavery because it made the production of cotton cheap and fast. And you know what? People love making that cabbage, don't they? And so they're going to find ways to maintain it. And that cotton gin is one of the things that will do that. And with the abundance of cotton, you get the textile industry that begins to grow. It comes later here in the United States, but that's going to be where industry begins in New England. And this is all working hand in hand. And so when you are talking about industry, it cannot happen without slavery. Even though the importation of slaves is banned in 1808, it still is maintained. And because of that Remember we talked about that survivability here in the continental US? That rate of increase is just continuing as that time goes on and the population is growing. Now, what you have developing though is that skilled labor that has been established here in this country, their population isn't growing too. And so they're beginning to negotiate with the owners of factories for those new wages that they're looking for. They want less hours. They want increased wages. They don't want to have less hours at the same rate, right? That's just a decrease in pay. What they're looking for now is they are looking for a way to combat what they see as the abuses of the ownership of shops and try to secure that income for themselves. Isn't that what we all want? We want some security. I want security.
Security and good benefits, yep.
Yeah, that'd be great because I sure as hell ain't getting it right now. But I am looking forward to the day when that happens. And they had the same things. One of the arguments they had is that they were still, it was permitted to whip their employees. They could deny wages. Employers had free reign with all of this sort of thing. And so they had to come back and collectively find a way to get their employers to listen to their demands. And this is where they begin to organize. You are talking about the early in the 19th century. We're going now out of the guilds into organization, where we're going to get those proto-unions that we'll talk about, right? Now, this is the separation. Early on, there was, in 1636, there was a group of fishermen who basically struck. This was before the term strike even comes into play. And it was seen as a rebellion against the fishing industry itself. But they did this as a means to fight back against their wages being withheld. And so this memory of that sort of thing finds itself working its way into the early 19th century, and early laborers are going to organize and begin to use the strike as a means to resist the abuses that they're beginning to see take place. One of the early ones, let me see here, I just got to locate it. I should be writing these things down. Even newspapers, the Royal Gazette, November 1778, it cannot be expected that we should continue to work at the wages that are now given. People are beginning to say, hey, we need income. It really is all about that income. How are you going to wind up setting up that security for yourself? The Federal Society of Journeyman Cordwainers, also known as shoemakers, establishes in Philadelphia in 1794. This is huge. This is going to be one of your very first organizations that is established so that laborers themselves can wind up calling for their own rights and their own security and prosperity. It's only made up of journeyman shoemakers, so it's what you call a trade union, what will be called a trade union later on. And it conducts strikes and pickets the master's shop in 1799. This is the first one. This is going to be a question I'm going to ask you on an exam. What's your first organization that's going to call a strike and going to picket the shop?
The journeyman, you said?
What's that?
I said, you said that was the journeyman?
Yes. the journeyman, not the master, right? The master is the employer, right? The journeymen are going to be the organizers. That is the Federal Society of Journeyman Cordwainers. 12 years that's going to be around, and they're going to wind up going into printing. Printers will see this as being successful. They're going to be a skilled labor that's going to wind up setting up their own organization. Others like cabinet makers and carpenters, you're going to start to see these small organizations begin to prop up from the success of that very first one in 1794.
You said 1794 was the first one?
Yep, that's what we've got here. There are mutual aid societies prior to that, but when you're talking about an organization that comes together for a single trade that's going to call for strikes, picket establishments, it's going to be that one, the Federal Society of Journeyman Cordwainers. And then from there, you're going to see other trades forming their own, the printers, the cabinet makers, and other things. These trade societies are going to evolve into those unions. And the unions that are, the early unions that will develop are going to actually be very strongly organized groups. They're going to have certificates of membership. They're going to have dues that will be established. They're going to wind up being established with a local community, which is where you get the term local and then the number of whatever it is, part of the union they're at. They're all local to begin with. So when someone comes into town and you want to get work, if you happen to be a cordwainer or a printer or a blacksmith, something of that nature, you got to go to the union. You've got to go to one of these organizations. Otherwise, you're going to be looked at as someone coming in from the outside that's going to be taking somebody else's work. It's interesting. I used to have my own business in Gettysburg. I used to sell T-shirts and tinkle bells and spoons and reenactment supplies and other things. But I never forget the time when my mentor told me, he says, you know what? Nothing makes people act funnier, quotation marks, than money. Money makes people do weird things, things they would never think of doing otherwise. And when you're talking about somebody's job, that's the same equation, right? If you try to take somebody else's job or you have someone else coming in trying to take your job, oh boy.
All hell breaks loose.
All hell breaks loose, okay? You know, we can look at, have you ever seen the news of strikes on the news, current strikes, where you see people holding signs and they're screaming their heads off and their faces are red and you can see anger, vitriol, and hatred just pouring out of them. It's because they see their livelihoods just disintegrating in front of themselves. And that's kind of the same thing that's going on here. That's why there's so much emotion that gets tied up into this particular subject. It's just kind of interesting. Merchants want to have direct control, right? They're the owners of whether it's a shoemaking shop or importation or this direct control over their goods for merchants is seen as a successful venue by artisans. And artisans are going to be those skilled laborers, the watchmakers, the shoemakers, the cabinet makers, and others. And so they're going to try to do the same thing. And when you try to get direct control over an entire industry or within a company, those who are under your employ are not going to win very well. And so they have to come together in order to prevent abuses. Employers want to hold down wages, because what happens when you hold down wages as an employer?
Well, when you control the money, you control your workers. What you say goes.
If you're an owner of a company, what's your ultimate goal?
To save money.
Save money, to make money.
More labor.
To make more money, right? You want to reduce expenditures. This is like rule number one. So the same thing's going on back then. They want to keep the wages low and the hours long so that they can produce enough to make that profit. That's just the way it works.
They still do that.
Right? It's happening today.
It's happening today, and it will continue. What we need to find, and this is the part that where I think a lot of people miss, is that what we need to find is we need to find a balance. We need to find the balance where capital and labor are really working together so that everybody's livelihood can be comfortable and secure.
Do you think that will ever happen? Because I mean, all these years it's kind of been just like what the young lady said. It's been this way. Like we all been working hard for like chump change. The cost of living goes up, but it's hard to survive off of that. Like, do you think that will ever be where it's equal? And I don't think so.
Susan, I'll get to you. In terms of ever get there, well, no one can see the future. I can't.
But would it be in the employer's best interest ever?
Sure it is. Because if you have happy employees who are paid enough and secure enough, they're going to keep coming back and they're going to keep producing. Here's the thing: if you have enough people that have enough expendable income, they're going to buy the product. Right? If your employees have enough money, they're going to buy a product. If your employees don't have enough money, they're not going to buy a product. It's that simple. This is how the Great Depression happened. Overproduction of goods with no expendable income. Susan, you had your hand up.
To answer her, I would say no, because from in the beginning, when employers have to pay employee overhead, didn't you see they send all their work out of the country so that they pay less for the labor? So I don't think we'll ever get there, because they find ways and means to save money for themselves.
Always.
They exhaust all the work out of the country because they have to pay less and they get it done. Nike and a pair of sneakers is an example.
Yeah,
Professor, I'm agree with Susan what she's saying.
Yeah, we being on this earth for like 30, 40, I haven't seen any much.
I can give you the example for my work. I'm working in medical field, for example, and we for coronavirus anyway, the patient are coming, yeah? And my boss, he always the people are coming, but he always complaining, no money. But I see the people are coming. I see the billing, the insurance and everything. And now he want to reduce us to work part-time. And I'm saying, why you want to reduce us to work on part-time?
Save money. Profit.
Yeah, you want to save money.
The overhead.
And you know what? This all goes back to things that have occurred before. So in terms of the part-time issue, this comes in with, and this all has to do with legislation that was passed with the Affordable Health Care Act. With the Affordable Health Care Act, if you don't work full-time,
you don't get
your employer doesn't have to give you benefits.
Right.
But the federal government will provide you benefits at a reduced rate based upon your salary. So now private companies just don't offer insurance, and they hire part-time.
I don't have any insurance because I work in the private company.
Yeah, that's part of the Affordable Health Care Act. The Affordable Health Care Act for many people will be a two-sided
sword
knife. You know, for those who make very little money, they're going to get health care at an extremely reduced or free rate.
For
those who are in that danger zone, you're going to pay for your insurance and it's going to hurt you, and it's not going to be that great. So that comes into legislation that was supposed to fix things. I'm not too fond of it, but that's a different discussion. In terms of labor, it's just part of the human condition. You're going to have people who have, and you're going to have people who have not. You're going to have people who will resist and will fight against and will change into a different system, and it's going to be okay for a while. But what's going to happen over a period of generations is it will wind up growing into its own problem, and then you're going to have that same cycle over and over again. And you're going to have a period where there's going to be balance, but then it will change. And then it's going to be out of balance. And then you're going to have change yet again. That is part of the story of labor history in the United States. You know, the story is that there are abuses and that labor organizes in order to resist those abuses. I deal with it in my own world. Yeah, I'm a professor, I teach, but trust me, I'm still a laborer in my own way. And I work 4 jobs. I have 2 part-time jobs, and I work at 2 different colleges, Truro and Harrisburg Area Community College. So, you know, it's an interesting situation. And in certain aspects, I am actually learning things along with you. And I hope to learn as much from you as you learn from me. Okay? So you all have very valid arguments in terms of this. Working only part-time, no benefits. The wages are kept low. It keeps you in a cycle of things.
That's how the system is set up, not to cross you. I believe that's how they set up the system.
So we need to find a way to create our own system that allows us to excel outside of that in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's a development of a product, whether it's a development of a new idea in entertainment, it can be new television show ideas. It can be, well, look at Mike Rowe in Dirty Jobs. Has anyone ever seen Dirty Jobs? Oh, it was a great show. It's kind of an older one now, but he would go around to all these different jobs throughout the country, and he would find the absolute filthiest job that you can get, and they would show it on TV. It was a huge hit.
Yes, I watched it once and never watch it again.
Oh my God, it makes you go, oh my God, that's horrible. I don't want to do that. But it for many people, it became a very addictive show. And prior to that, Mike Rowe was on, what's that shopping channel?
Home Shopping Network?
Yes. He actually sold watches on the Home Shopping web. Here's this nice.
Started the show?
Well, no, that was what he did beforehand.
Okay.
Prior to that, he was an opera singer.
Oh.
Yeah. And so, you know, who knows when you're stuck in a rut, you got to think about how you can rearrange things so it works for you.
Absolutely.
And that's part of what this is all about. And that's part of his story too. That's part of Eddie Van Halen's story, right? He came here, he dealt with things that, you know, were putting roadblocks into his way, couldn't speak the language, and he found a way outside of the system.
To overcome it. I was just telling my dad the other day that it seems like, to me, personally, the pandemic has brought out the entrepreneurship in so many people. Like every street I go to around my neighborhood, people are selling, you know, all kinds of items. And I didn't see so much of that. Now I see it because everybody's back is against the wall. They got to come up with some way to get some type of revenue, you know?
Necessity is the mother of invention. And whether it happens to be bringing back the cart salesperson on the street. When I grew up in New Haven, we used to have Sweeney's hot dogs. They were great. You'd see this guy walking around with his steam cart. Man, they had some of the greatest hot dogs, soft pretzels, bagel carts. Oh my God, the bagel carts. Oh, they were you don't see that much. But now maybe you're going to start to see that again. These are going to be
because the milkman is coming back.
Oh yeah.
Let's see it come back. Let's see people overcome the system and find a way for themselves to improve. This is all part of that. Carrie, you look like you got something going on.
I feel like this had to happen for people to have that push to build new companies, you know, businesses, unfortunately.
Well, think about the internet, right? Think about the internet. Where would we be with this situation without the internet?
Lost. The world would have literally paused. Like everything would have been paused. What could we do?
You think it's on pause now?
Right? Not to me, actually. I don't look at it like that, but others.
If we didn't have the internet.
Yeah.
So put your mind into that mindset while you're reading that textbook about what's happening to these individuals. They realize very rapidly that only through an effort on themselves together are they going to affect any change for the better where they're coming. They are actually witnessing this separation and the lowering of their status, and they recognize what's happening in their community. And so they are going to try to fight to maintain that as best they can. And it's going to become a fight. You talk about wages. You are looking at things like $1.25 a day for wages. And by the time you wind up putting out $8 a week, $4 a week, $7 a week, you can see the fluctuation as things take place. When you wind up putting out for your bills, you've got next to nothing left. And so they're looking for a way to make things better. And yes, it's the same story. It's the same story, different numbers, different businesses. But it is a constant struggle. The societies that are developing, you know, you're talking about some very strongly individualistic people. But now, if you're going to be a part of the society that's going to fight for these wages, you need to conform to rules and regulations so that you can maintain the deportment in public that they expect of you. This is a change, because prior to this, most of your skilled laborers are extraordinarily independent. You know, this is where things are beginning to change to standards of a craft. This is going to be where things are going to begin to shift so that people know what to expect. If you come from this association or organization, they can expect a standard of work coming from that. This is part of the good side of what's happening if you're talking about an industry owner, right? If I hire from a particular organization or association, I happen to know that I'm going to get a level of workmanship that I can stand behind. The only problem is I'm going to have to pay more for it as an employer. So that's where that comes for. What these associations want to press for is called a closed shop. Anyone know what a closed shop is?
Is it that they only hire from, like they shouldn't hire outside workers? It should be from that union?
Exactly. They only hire from that particular union or association at this time, we call it. A closed shop. That means that if someone comes in to work, they have to be a part of that association. And an open shop is just the reverse of that. They can hire anyone they want. But believe me, the associations or proto-unions that are around are going to fight back against that because they see that as a threat to their livelihood. And for part of the reason that the emotions will run so high is that there is so little to lose. I remember when one of my professors said this, I scrape and scrounge for everything that I have because there's just so little to lose, meaning that there's nothing really much else out there, so I'm going to take what I can get, right? That's what this closed shop leads to. This is where things are going to begin to develop with what they call tramping committees. Anyone know what a tramping committee is? No? Well, you're going to wind up enforcing the contract, right? You're holding the employer to the letter of the contract that you've made with this association. Because in the early days of associations and unions, you are not going to, our employer's going to wind up, oh yeah, I'll give you that. Yeah, sure, okay, sure. No. Right, you get it. They're going to try to back out of their agreements, right, to save more money. And so tramping committees are going to be set up so that they can tramp over to the boss's office and say, hey, here's what the contract says. We got to hold you to that. That is a tramping committee. Other times, this is where the they'll just all quit at once. This is where that strike shows up. They quit their jobs in the middle of the workday and they go home. As a unified effort, that's quite a showing, isn't it? If everybody in the building all of a sudden says, well, it's 11 o'clock, we're done, and then goes home, it's like, what do you mean? Can you fire everyone?
No.
You could, but the consequences would be problematic, wouldn't it? You wouldn't happen to have any production. You'd have to hire a whole new crew, all trained. So practically speaking, you'd send out a representative and say, okay, what's the deal? And then they begin that bargaining again. So there's that. They establish a picket line and they maintain it. So anyone who's going to come across to wind up breaking this strike, right? Scabs, they'll eventually call them, cannot cross, meaning that the shop is shut down and there is no money being produced. So I want to take a brief break at this point for about 15 minutes, right? So why don't we say at 11 o'clock, we will reconvene.
Okay.
So that we continue on. I've got to get myself a little more coffee, and it never hurts to stretch the legs a little bit. This is a 2.5 hour class, right?
Yes.
So if you've been sitting for 2.5 hours, you ever get that tingling in those legs and you're just like, oh man, I got to get move. So let's get up and move around a little bit, get some coffee, brief snack if you need, that sort of thing. And we will be right back at 11 o'clock. Is that good for everybody?
Yes, Professor.
Yeah, that's fine.
Mark, if I could have you stick around for just a moment.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to ask you.
Outstanding. I'm going to pause the recording and I'll see everybody 11.
Okay.
There. Because labor is now pushing back against employers. When labor pushes back against employers, what are employers going to do?
They're going to rebel?
Well, do they see it as rebelling?
No, they're fighting for
they
their
feel
rights.
that they have the upper hand.
They see that. Well, Najalo is exactly. They viewed it as their property rights.
Yeah.
And so they're going to fight to retain that. So what you're going to have now is how employers will fight back against that labor system, and that's going to be the law versus labor aspect of this. Employers are beginning to get concerned because we just fought a war for independence, and then we had a national debate over what it is going to mean for rights in the country, because our Constitution didn't occur when the revolution ended. 1789 is when we had our Constitution ratified. Right? We didn't have our first president until 1790, George Washington. And so we have a lot of time of development. That's only 10 years prior to the 19th century. 10 years. Wow. That's it. So there's a very short time, and employers are beginning to see a pushback against what they viewed as their personal property rights. And they need to find a way to get that back, at least in their eyes. And they're going to use the courts, our brand new established court system. Marshall is going to wind up taking the court system and making it the most powerful arm in the government. Initially, it was thought of as being the weakest. But Marshall changes that, and it's the court system that the employers are going to go to in an attempt to, quote unquote, put them back in their place, because they see them as just being labor to be used up and expended. That's just the way they view it. If you don't want to work for me, you can go work for someone else. So they wind up going to the courts, and they actually wind up getting these organizations and association societies defined as a criminal conspiracy. right? When you have more than two people combining together to come to a cause against something else, that's a conspiracy. It's the definition of it. Mm-hmm. And employers are seeing this now as a criminal action. They declared that the means that they were using were of a nature too arbitrary and coercive, and went to deprive their fellow citizens of rights as precious as any that they contend for. And so you have two opposing sides, employer and labor. Now you got to try to find that balance, because if anyone winds up getting the upper hand, one side or the other, what's going to happen?
It's going to be unbalanced.
It's going to be unbalanced, and it's going to be ugly. The most impactful example of imbalance, in my view, is the French Revolution. Has anyone done any reading on the French Revolution? No? You know, it's in France. There's a big revolution. You know, Louis XVI is deposed, and they're going to go off and do their thing. But what happens is they start decapitating people, and then it turns into a witch hunt, and those in power accuse others, and they're immediately dragged to the guillotine and decapitated, and then those leaders are decapitated, and then it keeps progressing, and it's a horrible bloodbath. It's literally 3 or 4 revolutions wrapped up into one. And all of that death is brought about as a result of a severe imbalance. And that's
severe imbalance between who?
Well, that's an imbalance between leadership and the people.
Okay.
But you can make the equation to the comparison to employers and labor.
Okay.
Because what labor is enduring is at this time a very challenging life. They are reduced in their status in the community to a much lower level than they were earlier on. You know, when we think about how things should go, if you have experience and skill and you've developed over time, you should be making more money as time goes on, right? Mm-hmm. That doesn't always happen. And at this time frame, that was the case. Wages were falling. Hours were extending. And this is why they come together. And so what you get is a fight in this time frame between the Federalists and the Jeffersonian Republicans. This is politics. And when you start talking about labor history, politics is going to get involved. It depends on the political philosophy as to which side of the fence you're really going to wind up on. And Jefferson is much more of the individual, and the Federalists are much more of a centralized government. And the Philadelphia Aurora asks, was there anything in the Constitution of the United States or the Constitution of Pennsylvania which gives one man the right to say to another what should be the price of labor? And it was English common law that such things became possible. Associations originate in England. Oftentimes, European developments take a while to reach their point over here, and this is the same thing. And English common law, we just fought a revolution to get rid of English common law, didn't we? Mm-hmm. You're talking about 1806 now. Think about the proximity to the American Revolution. So this idea that an individual can turn around and say, hey, you need to pay me more, rubs people the wrong way if you're an employer. It's like, wait a minute, we just fought a war that states that I don't have to do this. If you don't want to work for me, you can go somewhere else. Courts are going to begin to rule on the side of the employer. They're going to say that a closed shop is unconstitutional, because what you're now doing is you are infringing on the right of the individual to seek employment wherever they feel they can. Remember, a closed shop, you won't hire anyone unless you're a part of the union.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what does that mean for someone else that needs work that's not part of the union?
They got to
They're not going to get it.
What does that mean for the employer who's hiring the people? Hey, you got great skill, but I can't hire you. You see where I'm going here? And this is where the courts are beginning to look at this. And so there actually is a debate over what is legally allowed to occur. You know, there's now a debate over how are the organizations a conspiracy, or are they looking to work for the betterment of the society as a whole? That is the issue. We got about 5 more minutes on this topic, and then we're going to go into the paper because I know some folks have a few questions on that. You're going to see a pattern occur with unions, and this pattern is going to occur over and over again. Economies, right? Do economies lay flat and just keep climbing? Do they go in a nice straight line?
No.
No.
Would we like them to go in a nice straight line?
Sure.
Oh yeah, we love a nice straight line. Their straight lines are awesome. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, in an economy, you get this sort of thing, right? It looks like this great big wave. Sometimes you get to jagged up and down, all kinds of crazy stuff. They're not fun. But what you see in this pattern is every time you have a climbing economy or a peak in that economy, you're going to have the strength behind the labor union because it's a strong, vibrant economy. They need production so that folks can wind up buying the goods, right? Making the profit. And so labor can band together and they can demand better wages or hours as a result of this strong economy. This happens to be part of the law of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, the invisible hand. Demand increases wage or price. If a lot of people want something, what happens to the price of that thing?
It goes up, it inflates.
It goes up. Yeah. So if you're working in an industry where a lot of people want something, jobs are available, as well as your bargaining power. When you hit a depression, what happens to jobs?
They go away.
Right. Is there lots of demand for stuff in a depression?
No, because people don't have the money to pay for these things.
Right.
You're taking any expendable income and you're putting it into food, you're putting it into rent, you're putting it into whatever you've got to do. And the same thing happens with businesses. If people aren't buying stuff, you don't need to make stuff, which means you don't need as many employees, which means you need to lay them off and that sort of thing. Is there going to be any bargaining power for an organized labor system in that environment?
I don't think so. They're not going to have much wiggle room to do much if that's the case.
Exactly. It's really straightforward. If you don't happen to have the demand for it and you turn around and go to your employer and say, we need more money.
Yeah, they're not going to want to hear nothing.
Pound sand, buddy. I'm sorry. This is what I got. Right? And so that's the situation. You're actually coming into a horrible depression that the United States is going to encounter. We hadn't encountered depressions before because we were dealing with other things. But now that we're an independent nation and we've got this economy that's going up, it's now starting to take a downturn. Labor is going to experience some very, very difficult times. In fact, many labor organizations and associations will collapse as a result of this depression. And this is going to be a pattern that will occur over and over again. Strong economies, you're going to see bargaining room for labor, and you'll see an increase in organizations, whether an association, an organization, mutual aid fund, whatever you want to call it, they're going to go up in number and strength. In a depression, you're going to see no bargaining room, no jobs, right? That sort of thing's going to occur. So we will pick up at this point in our next class, and we're going to push forward in various chapters. I'm probably going to cover probably 3 or 4 chapters in the next class.
Okay.
So I want you to make sure that you're maintaining your reading, keeping things going, and you're taking notes when you're doing your reading. And I encourage doing this.
Highlighting.
Highlighting. See, I go through highlighters like nobody's business.
That's my favorite friend too.
Oh man, different colors, different subjects, color coordinated. I put little dog ears on the sides of the pages that are important. These are things that will help you greatly. So please take that to heart when you're doing your reading. It'll make a big difference, I promise. So what I want to talk about now before we need to go in the last 15 minutes of class is the paper. Bum, 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 bum. Right? We all got to write one. And for those of you who are here, I thank you for that. So let's talk about subjects. This is going to be a subject of your choosing. I'm not going to dictate this. I want you to be interested in the paper you're going to write me. It's a 5-page paper. It's not a lot, I promise. I know. You go, oh my God, I got to write a 5-page paper.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's all right. In this part of your schooling, that does seem like a lot. But when I was going and getting my bachelor's degree and my master's degree, I was writing 10-page papers in an afternoon. I'm not going to ask that of you. I'm asking you to give me a 5-page paper. I want you to do the proper research, which means I want you to use the library database. I want you to ask questions of your librarians. I would like you to use primary and secondary sources for your paper and to use citation. If you don't cite your paper, what do they call that?
Plagiarism.
Exactly. Thank you. We went over that with the syllabus. I don't like plagiarism. So don't do it. Use the citation. It's very simple. And we can go over citation in another class on the quick and easy way of making that easier for yourself. In terms of subjects, you can choose any subject within labor history of the United States that you would like.
I have a question. I'm sorry, Professor.
No, go ahead.
Just because I'm not sure on my topic, I want to do the Black Wall Street, which is in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Okay. Yeah.
Is that something that would be good for you, or?
Can you tie that in with labor?
Okay. So, all right. I have to see though.
You certainly can. I am not saying you cannot, and that would be a fabulous topic to do. Tie it in with labor. How is it labor matches up with Black Wall Street in Tulsa?
Okay.
You know, where's the need? Because there's got to be a balance with that exchange, right?
Yes.
So you tie that in, man, boom, I'll approve that.
Do you have, Professor, an outline of what you're looking for as far as questions, or we're just doing research?
You're doing research.
Okay.
And here's what I'm when you're talking about questions: who, where, what, when, and why. And
W's.
Right. All the W's. Oh, damn the W's. Ah. Well, I was in school for 12 and a half years. You know how many W's I had to ask? Yeah, finally got you to chuckle. Awesome. My day is
when
made.
do we have to get the topic to you to be approved?
Yes, please. I want a concrete topic.
Okay, no, because the paper is due the 15th of November, correct?
Mm-hmm. I may have to push that back, but I'm please think it over. Shoot me an email.
Okay.
Shoot me a text message. Text message would be fastest. Let me know what you're thinking.
Okay.
Yes, Valeria.
Yeah, the research paper needs to be done by November 15.
Yes. I may push that back, but for right now, that's the due date.
Okay.
When we're thinking of a paper, the 5-page paper, right? You're thinking of those W questions. You're also thinking about that topic. It could be the Haymarket riot. It could be, they called one here in Pennsylvania, the 1872 Dust War. There's the use of federal troops in strike breaking. There's Homestead. strike. These are big ones. There's the 1877 railway strike. In the early 20th century, there was a coal miners' strike that Teddy Roosevelt came back on and mercilessly crushed. There's all sorts of things that can take place, how labor changes over the country, but you do need to give me a researched topic. Send me a message, let me know what you're thinking. You can make it personal to you so that you actually are taking ownership of what this topic is. If it's important to you, I know I'm going to get probably your best work. And that's what I want to see. So make it relevant to you in some way, shape, or form. Okay. The more you put yourself into it, the better it's going to be. Take your time. We'll go over a couple of techniques in the next class to make writing the paper a little bit easier for you. But do the research, utilize the databases, they're out there. Ask questions of your librarians, they will answer you and they will be excited to answer you. I have yet to meet a librarian who goes, oh, they really need to know this. No, they are excited to share that information with you, and they will help you search. So please do that. Other questions pertaining to the paper?
Are there a certain amount of sources that you want for the paper?
As many as you need to make it right. I would like to see no less than 3.
3 sources?
No less.
No less.
No less. So.
And what font size and format?
That's good. Oh, good. Both are good questions. Font size will be 12 point. I would like to have Times New Roman, please. It's all listed in the syllabus. And double spaced.
And MLA?
MLA. Now, is there anyone here who's going into history as a discipline?
No, but they took on the summer the civil rights, the history.
Okay, well, I'm just asking because that would be a different citation source, and which I would teach that individual if they were going into history as a discipline. But you're probably wise not going into history as a discipline because you won't make any money. Any other questions on the paper?
No.
Okay, let me see if I've got. I'm going to show you one thing really quick, which I think is pretty darn cool. And this will save you a huge amount of time in terms of your citation. When I was doing papers, I would wind up spending at least 2 hours on my works cited page. That's a long time, by the way. Nowadays, you don't have to do that. You can do it a lot quicker by taking a look at this. This is, of course, a Word document. When you're writing your paper, one way that you can rapidly insert citation properly into your paper is go to References up here in the ribbon bar. Then you can scroll down to this Style.
We can't see it.
Professor, we can see it.
You can't see it?
We see just only your...
You see your screen.
Your screen.
Your desktop.
Oh, well, hang on one second. Let me check something then. My humble apologies, folks. Maybe I clicked the wrong one. And thank you for correcting that. That would be why. Can you see that now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so what happens is we go to References. Normally you see this. You want to go to References, and then you go to Style, and you drop it down to MLA.
Oh.
All right, yeah, there's the start. It's pretty cool, though. It gets even cooler. You can go to Manage Sources, and you can input your own sources into a database in your computer. You can go to Bibliography. This is for setting up the sources into the paper. Insert citation, add new source. What type of source is it you're using? There's book. You can go to a journal article. You can go to, let's see here, electronic source. You can go to a website. Let's say you're looking at the website for the AFL-CIO, right? Or maybe you're going to a conference proceeding that you've gotten a copy of, and you put in the author, the title, the editor, the pages, the year it was published and produced, the publication name, city. You just input that information in there, and then you hit OK, and it's going to save it with the paper. And then when you wind up getting finished with all of those sources, and you've been inputting them as you've been going along, you can then go to Bibliography, and you click Bibliography. And what happens is you use, for my class, please use the works cited portion. So you got works cited references, bib. You want to go to works cited, and you click that, and it's going to give you the works cited title, and then for each of the sources you've used with that paper, it's going to be put into format 1, 2, 3, 4, right down in order. This does not mean that you cannot, you just leave it as it is. You do have to do a little bit of editing using your MLA format in your book and reference, and we'll go into that in the next class. But this saves you an hour and a half. It'll save you a lot of time. So I wanted to make sure that you were aware of this option that's in Word, and there are other options like this in other websites. But I am not going to continue to expound anymore, because we are getting to that point where we need to go. So does anyone have any questions for me at this time? No?
Reading for next class, chapters 9 and 10.
You just keep right on reading. You got it.
Okay.
Yep. Don't wait for me to tell you. You just keep on chugging along with that reading. And the further along you get, the better off you're going to be. Just keep taking notes and highlighting and doing all that good stuff while you can. If there are no other questions.
So when is a good time for me to be able to talk to you?
You shoot me a text message, Colette, and what we'll do is we'll just set up a time and we'll have a Zoom meeting together. Does that sound good?
Sure, no problem.
Probably we can even do that a little later today. I'll just be at my other job.
Okay, all right, no problem.
All right. Yep, shoot me a text message. You know where my phone number is. It's in the syllabus.
No problem.
Anything else?
Nope.
No.
All right. I'm hoping I'm meeting your expectations today. I know this was like the first full class. It's been a little bit different for everybody. And,
well, you caught us up on everything in it one class.
Well, there's more to go. Believe me. Well, there's 24 chapters, and we got to get through quite a few here in the process.
Yeah.
So you're welcome to go. If there's anything else you need, I'll be here for just a couple more minutes before I have to run.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks. Have a wonderful day. I'm going to stop.
Thank you. You too.